You still live in that dump, Dad? Seriously, those words cut deeper than a winter wind on the streets of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My son, Brandon, leaned against the doorway of my tiny one-bedroom apartment, smirking like he had just delivered the ultimate truth. The smell of fresh coffee from my modest kitchen mingled with the faint scent of old paint and worn carpet. I gritted my teeth, forcing calm. I had spent 30 years building my life, working long hours as a machinist at the local plant, saving every penny, quietly watching my children grow. My small apartment wasn't a palace, but it was mine. Every scratch on the counter, every dent in the old fridge, every faded curtain told a story of sacrifice, patience, and endurance. Yet here stood Brandon, laughing at my life as if a larger house automatically equaled a better person. I took a slow breath, feeling the sting but keeping my voice measured. Brandon, this place has been enough for me, and it served me well. I've never needed your approval to live a life of dignity, he scoffed. Dignity? Dad, you're embarrassing yourself. Mom would have hated to see you living like this. The comment hit harder than expected. My ex-wife had passed years ago, and Brandon had a habit of invoking her name to score points, yet another tool in his arsenal to make me feel small. I turned to face him fully, letting the quiet dignity of age and experience settle around me. You think this is embarrassing, Brandon, but you don't see the years of work, the patience, the decisions behind every dollar, every choice I've made. He rolled his eyes. Patience? Decisions? Dad, you're just old-fashioned. You're obsolete. Obsolete. The word burned, but instead of responding with anger, I let it sit. I let the apartment, the cramped space, the tiny kitchen, the peeling wallpaper stand as a testament to my life. Simple, honest, unpretentious. Brandon laughed again, louder this time, and turned to leave, saying over his shoulder, Enjoy your little cage, Dad. We've moved on. You should too. I watched him go, my heart pounding but my mind calculating. Betrayal had many forms, and his was verbal, sharp, cutting. But I knew something he didn't. Patience and careful planning often outweighed arrogance and impulsiveness. I sank into my worn armchair, feeling the familiar creak beneath me, and pulled out the papers I'd been quietly studying for months. Property deeds, bank statements, mortgage records, legal files. Brandon and his sister had always assumed my modest living meant I had nothing, but I had something far more valuable. Knowledge, foresight, and control hidden in plain sight. I whispered to myself, They think I'm weak. They think I'm small. But every empire has cracks, and every mansion has a door. Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Brandon didn't see it coming. The careful moves I had made, the quiet investments, the overlooked ownership documents. Soon, their sense of superiority, their mocking laughter, would meet the reality of my preparation. The quiet of my apartment felt heavier that night, not with despair, but with anticipation. Each sound, the faint hum of the radiator, the soft ticking of my clock, the distant rumble of traffic, seemed amplified, echoing the potential for change. The world outside, with its flashy houses and loud opinions, mattered less now. What mattered was strategy, patience, and justice, and I had all three. I rose slowly, moving toward the small desk by the window, where a stack of papers awaited. My hands shook slightly, not with fear, but with the intensity of focus. Every document, every bank statement, every deed told a story, and they were about to tell another. One Brandon and his sister would never forget. As the night settled over Cedar Rapids, the street lamps casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood, I smiled faintly. The time for payback had not yet arrived, but the foundation was laid. Their arrogance would be their undoing, and when it happened, they would learn the harsh truth. Mocking a man's life doesn't diminish his power. It merely delays the reckoning. The plan was in motion, the first pieces moving quietly, unseen, unstoppable. The mansion they boasted of, the wealth they flaunted, the sense of superiority, they would all be mine to unravel, one careful, calculated step at a time. And that reckoning would start sooner than they imagined. Brandon's laughter still echoed in my mind as I sat down at the small, scratched desk by the window. The city lights of Cedar Rapids glimmered faintly, painting the room with gold streaks across the faded wallpaper. I pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers I'd collected over months. Bank statements, property deeds, legal contracts. I had kept them meticulously under layers of dust and apparent neglect, so no one would suspect their significance. It was ironic. They thought my modest apartment reflected weakness. In truth, it reflected restraint, discipline, and foresight, qualities Brandon had never understood. My daughter, Emily, was the quieter one. She never mocked me openly like Brandon did, but her eyes told the story. Disappointment, embarrassment, a subtle judgment for my humble life. Yet both of them had grown complacent, overconfident. That was my advantage. I remembered the last Thanksgiving 2 years ago. The smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie had filled my ex-wife's old house, now belonging to Emily and Brandon after her passing. "Dad, sit over there," Emily had said, motioning to a chair near the wall. "We've got the adults' table and the kids' table." Brandon had chuckled beside her. "Yeah, Dad, don't get lost near the old furniture. It might be too complicated for you." I had smiled politely, taking my seat at the corner, silently noting every detail. The way they'd rearranged her furniture, the new wine glasses they flaunted, the pride in their voices when they spoke of how far ahead they were financially. But I had observed more than they realized. The mortgage on their mansion was high. They had relied on lines of credit, and their lifestyle exceeded their income. They were living in borrowed luxury, one paycheck away from instability. Meanwhile, I had quietly diversified, saved, and invested. I had patience. I had control. Back in the apartment, I opened the folder and studied the deeds again. Each property I owned was legally and fully mine, hidden behind shell companies and trusts. Emily and Brandon thought they had secured everything after our mother's passing. But in their rush, they had overlooked details, loopholes, and the power of meticulous planning. I could almost hear Brandon's smug voice again. "You'll never understand real money, Dad," I smiled. Soon, he would. The next morning, I visited the Cedar Rapids courthouse, walking past the polished marble floors and the bustling clerks. The courthouse had always intimidated me as a young man, but now I walked in with quiet authority. I filed a series of legal documents, notices of ownership, lien placements, and contracts that would soon tie their finances to my control. Walking back through the streets, I passed familiar diners, the smell of frying bacon wafting through the cold morning air. I paused at Joe's Coffee, ordered a black coffee, and let the warmth seep through my hands. I overheard snippets of gossip from locals. Emily had been bragging about the upcoming renovations to her mansion, and Brandon had taken on a second mortgage to fund a new car. Their overconfidence, their arrogance, their sense of invincibility, they were playing right into my plan. Returning home, I spread the documents across my small dining table. Each paper represented a step closer to reclaiming the respect I had lost, the dignity I had been denied. The irony was delicious. Their mocking laughter, the way they had belittled me, would be the instrument of their own downfall. I dialed a lawyer friend I had known for decades, someone who understood the nuances of property law and estate planning. "It's time," I said calmly, explaining the situation. "They think they've got it all. They're wrong. I want every loophole, every technicality exploited to the fullest, quietly. No one can know until it's too late. The lawyer chuckled, a warm, understanding sound over the line. I've been waiting for you to make this move, Tom. Let's make sure they feel the consequences of their arrogance. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the faded ceiling. The plan was unfolding. Every insult, every mocking comment, every dismissive glance was being accounted for. They had underestimated me. By that evening, I had begun contacting banks, verifying liens, and preparing official notices. Emily would soon realize that her secure mansion had vulnerabilities, and Brandon would discover that his bragging about financial independence was premature. As night fell, I looked out my small apartment window again. The city below was alive, unaware of the storm gathering in the quiet life of a man they had mocked. My patience was paying off, and soon the tables would turn. But just as I was about to close my folder, a knock sounded at the door. I froze. Who could it be at this hour? A neighbor? A courier? Or had someone begun to suspect the quiet man behind the small apartment? I opened the door slowly and my heart skipped a beat. Standing there, smirking and holding a glass of wine, was Brandon. "Dad, thinking about making a move without telling us?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Funny, very funny. I realized, in that instant, that my plan had to move faster. They were watching, perhaps suspicious, perhaps testing me. The game was shifting, and it was about to get dangerous. Brandon's smirk lingered in the doorway like a shadow I couldn't shake. "Funny. Thinking you can outsmart us, Dad," he said, swirling the wine in his glass as if it were some magical elixir that would shield him from reality. I leaned casually against the doorframe, matching his calm with my own. "Outsmart? Brandon, I'm not trying to outsmart anyone. I'm just doing what I should have done years ago, protecting what's mine." He laughed, the sound sharp and overconfident. "You? Protect? From us? You've got the retirement home energy, Dad. Let's be honest, you barely know what you're doing." His words hit, but not like before. Not like the countless times I had heard similar dismissals. I had grown stronger in patience, sharper in observation. I let him rant, let him assume superiority. Every word he spoke was data for my plan. Once he left, I took a deep breath and sat at the desk again. Time was critical. Brandon's unexpected visit meant he was suspicious. I had to accelerate the strategy, but carefully. One wrong move, and they could put up legal walls that would slow me down. I called my lawyer, Richard, a seasoned man who had been helping me structure my affairs for decades. "Richard," I said, "they're aware." Brandon came by, smug, arrogant, full of himself. "We need to move faster, but we can't tip our hand." Richard chuckled. "I expected as much. That kid is clueless about how deep your control runs. You've got documents, trusts, liens, all in place. We just have to activate them at the right moment." I nodded, feeling a quiet thrill. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, asserting my authority over a family that had mocked and underestimated me. The next few days became a precise choreography. I visited banks, filing liens quietly, ensuring that every financial asset they had in their mansion, mortgage statements, lines of credit, even small business investments tied to Brandon's tech startup, was subtly exposed to legal leverage I controlled. Every move was designed to restrict them without alerting them too soon. At night, I documented everything meticulously in my journal. Notes about Emily's obsession with the mansion's renovations, Brandon's boastful texts about buying a new car, his bragging about promotions. Each arrogance-filled remark was now ammunition. Then came the local gossip, the lifeblood of a small town. I started planting subtle reminders among neighbors, friends, and acquaintances. Questions like, "I heard the mortgage on the old Whitman mansion is tricky. Did you know?" Or, "Funny, they're remodeling while their loan is still unsettled. Sounds risky." Nothing direct, nothing incriminating, just enough to create doubt and tension, making the household restless. One evening, I attended a local diner, the smell of sizzling bacon and brewed coffee filling the air. I overheard Brandon boasting to a friend about a potential expansion of their home gym. I smiled under my hat. Every overextension they boasted about was another thread in the web I was weaving. Returning home, I spread out my maps and charts. I traced the connections: properties, bank accounts, investment funds, tax liabilities. The picture was beautiful, a network of vulnerability just waiting for the right move. Then I remembered Emily's careless comment months ago. "Dad, you really live so small. You'll never understand real wealth." I smiled, almost softly. She would understand soon enough. The tipping point came unexpectedly. A call from Richard, his voice calm but edged with excitement. "Tom, the paperwork is ready. We can file the final claims tomorrow. It'll lock them legally into a position they can't easily escape. But timing is everything. Brandon and Emily must not suspect until the notices hit." I sat back, thinking. One move too early, and they could contest. One move too late, and their arrogance could cause me to lose leverage. Precision was everything. I rehearsed the confrontation in my mind, the look on Brandon's face when he realized that the poor old man he mocked had, in fact, orchestrated the takeover of their mansion. The whisper of disbelief on Emily's lips when she read the notices. The taste of poetic justice, slow and meticulous, settling like a fine wine. But even as I prepared, I couldn't ignore one pressing reality. They were dangerous. Brandon, in particular, had no idea how far I could go legally, ethically, but his pride could drive him to rash actions. I had to anticipate every possible counter. As night fell, I stood by the window, the city lights reflecting on the polished hood of a neighbor's car. I thought of the final move, the day when they would discover that every mocking word, every sneer, every insult had been quietly recorded, accounted for, and used against them. And yet, I knew that before that day arrived, I needed one more piece, a catalyst to ensure they had no legal escape. No chance to negotiate. It was a gamble. One final step, and I was ready. The morning was crisp, unusually quiet for Cedar Rapids. I parked my old pickup across the street from the Whitman mansion, letting the engine idle as I watched the grand house glint in the autumn sun. Brandon's pride and Emily's luxury obsession were all there. Shimmering windows, freshly polished floors, and that new Italian marble countertop Brandon had boasted about on social media. Soon, all of it would mean nothing to them. I stepped out, briefcase in hand, calm, collected. Inside that briefcase were legal documents Richard and I had prepared for months. Liens, claims, notices of ownership activation. They were airtight, unassailable. The last piece of the puzzle was to deliver them. I rang the doorbell. Brandon opened it immediately, smirk plastered on his face, dressed like a Silicon Valley executive on vacation. "Dad, what brings you here? You're looking a little intense this morning." "Brandon," I said evenly, "I'm just here to settle a few things." Emily appeared behind him, hair perfectly styled, her expression curious and cautious. "Settle what?" I handed Brandon the envelope. "Read this carefully." He opened it, brows furrowing almost immediately. Emily peered over his shoulder. "Wait, what is this?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. Brandon's smirk vanished, replaced by confusion. "Dad, this isn't possible. These are liens, mortgage claims, everything. It's like you own the house now." I nodded calmly. "Exactly. Every dollar, every asset tied to this mansion, legally under my name. The bank confirms it, and so do the deeds. You mocked me, called me irrelevant, said I belonged in a nursing home. And yet, here I am, holding the keys you thought were untouchable." Emily stepped forward, panic flickering in her eyes. "This has to be a mistake!" "Lawyers make mistakes all the time." "Not this time," I interrupted, voice steady but cold. Richard double-checked everything. Triple-checked. You've been careless, arrogant, and cruel. You assumed I wouldn't fight back, that I'd just fade away. You were wrong. Brandon turned pale, realizing that his phone calls, boastful posts, and careless bragging had been collected and documented. Every arrogant word he uttered was evidence of their imprudent financial overextension and entitlement. I can't believe this, he stammered. You can't do this. I just did, I replied simply. You taught me patience over the years, Brandon. Now you'll learn humility. Emily's voice shook. Tom, please. There has to be a way to fix this. We can negotiate. No negotiations, I said, shaking my head. Every insult, every snide remark, every attempt to belittle me has led to this moment. You've lost more than a house today. You've lost the arrogance that blinded you. And if you think this is just about the house, you're mistaken. It's about respect, dignity, and accountability. Brandon's jaw tightened. You'll regret this. I smiled faintly. Regret? Maybe. But right now, you'll understand the value of underestimating someone you mocked. Neighbors began to gather, having heard commotion, peeking curiously. Some knew our family history. Whispers traveled fast in small towns. The shame on Brandon and Emily's faces was visible. They were stripped of pride, their social standing crumbling before a small but attentive crowd. I handed over copies of the deeds to the neighbors discreetly, letting the news sink in. Word would spread, and their social reputation would follow the legal one into ruin. Then, Brandon made the mistake I had anticipated. He stormed toward me, hand raised, as if to snatch the paperwork. I held it firmly, unflinching. A knock at the door announced the arrival of the local sheriff. Brandon's eyes widened. What are you doing here? Legal enforcement, I said calmly. I've asked Richard to involve local authorities to witness the transfer. Everything here is above board. Any interference could be considered obstruction. Brandon froze. Emily's panic escalated. They understood, finally, that the law and I were on my side. I stepped back, letting the magnitude of the moment settle. The mansion that had been a symbol of mockery and arrogance for years was now mine. Their faces told the story better than any words. Shock, disbelief, and finally, the first glimmers of fear. And yet, even as I stood there victorious, a small flicker of doubt crept in. One question lingered. Would this be enough to restore the dignity I had lost over decades, or merely serve as a temporary victory against their pride? The answer, I realized, would come in time, when Brandon and Emily understood the full consequences of their actions. The day faded into a quiet evening, the mansion now eerily still, stripped of the vibrancy Brandon and Emily had so carefully curated. I walked through the halls slowly, taking in the high ceilings, the polished floors, the massive kitchen that had once been a symbol of their extravagance. Every room was a reminder, not of wealth, but of the arrogance that had cost them everything. I paused by the staircase, looking down at the empty foyer. It was surreal. For decades, I had sacrificed, worked odd jobs, fixed their mistakes, and tolerated the sneers. And now, at last, the tables had turned. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. Victory rarely comes without its weight. The phone rang. It was Richard, my lawyer and friend. Tom, the transfer is officially recorded. The bank has confirmed your sole ownership. They're stunned. It's a clean sweep. You've done it. I leaned back in the antique chair near the window, letting the cool evening light wash over me. Thank you, Richard. I couldn't have done it without you. You deserve this. You've been pushed around, mocked, and underestimated. Now you've proven that patience and planning are stronger than arrogance and entitlement. I hung up, savoring the silence. Outside, the neighborhood murmurs had already begun. Word spreads fast in small towns like Cedar Rapids. Soon, every neighbor would know. The Whitman heirs had been humbled, and I had reclaimed not just property, but dignity. Brandon and Emily had left. I'd given them a deadline, a chance to pack, but the look on their faces when they realized the law was firmly on my side told me everything. They were humiliated, stripped of status, facing a reality they had never prepared for. They had gambled on my passivity and lost spectacularly. I walked to the backyard, inhaling the crisp autumn air, the faint scent of smoke from nearby chimneys mingling with the cool breeze. For years, I had felt invisible in my own family, overlooked and mocked. But as I stood there, I realized that dignity is something you reclaim slowly, piece by piece, not all at once. Today was a step toward that peace. I smiled, thinking of the irony. They had spent years teaching me to be humble, thinking they were the teachers, and now I had shown them that the lessons they refused to heed could be taught in the harshest way possible. Justice, poetic and absolute, had been served. Sitting on the porch, I took a deep breath and let the emotions wash over me. Relief, triumph, even a little joy. The mansion, once a symbol of their greed and mockery, now belonged to me, and with it, the reassurance that I had fought, not just for property, but for my own worth. In the quiet, I thought of the future. No more sneers, no more belittlement. I would maintain this house, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Never underestimate the quiet, the patient, or the overlooked. Those who mock often fall hardest when they forget the strength of dignity and perseverance. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and violet, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. The weight of years of disrespect had been lifted. I had regained my home, my peace, and my place in the world, not through anger or violence, but through strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve. Brandon and Emily would tell their version of the story, sure. But in Cedar Rapids, truth travels faster than lies, and soon enough, everyone would know. The man they had mocked, dismissed, and underestimated had risen, not with vengeance alone, but with undeniable justice. I stepped inside, locking the front door behind me. The house was mine, not just legally, but spiritually, and for the first time in years, I could feel the weight of my life's work resting securely on my shoulders. I had fought, I had won, and most importantly, I had proven that dignity cannot be stolen. It must be claimed. I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and whispered softly to myself, "Let this be a lesson, not just for them, but for anyone who ever doubts the quiet strength of a man determined to reclaim what's rightfully his." The night was calm, the mansion silent, and for the first time in decades, I could finally sleep without fear, without resentment, knowing that poetic justice had found its mark. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. The chapter of mockery was closed. The chapter of dignity was just beginning.